Alright, I'm just setting up. I'm almost ready and I'll be getting started in a second. Just want to make sure that I've got all my lights on and all the little bits and pieces that should be working are in fact working. Okay, and I will be answering questions, just those questions will get answered near the end of the stream rather than at the beginning. Okay, let's get started. Hi, welcome to HowtoDandD. My name is Fred Wheeler and today I want to talk about Dungeons & Dragons 5e or D&D 5e, and this is Warlock Basics number 3, and we're going to focus on invocations, Eldritch invocations. I will be using the Warlock pre-made character sheet that you can find on the official Dungeons & Dragons website. For today, I will be using the Tiefling Warlock who is level 2, because at level 2 you get your invocations, not at level 1. I want you to open your player's handbook to page 110. So 110 through to 111 are where the vast majority of the Eldritch invocations are explained, and you'll find that in the player's handbook. So as I said, at level 2, the Warlock gets access to invocations. And these are quite peculiar. They are sort of like spells, but not completely like spells. They are gained through study of the occult lore. You get unearth some sort of Eldritch invocation or a fragment of forbidden knowledge that you can imbue yourself with, and often this ability is intrinsic to you. Once you gain it, you cannot lose it. And abide by some magical principle. A lot of the invocations are simply duplications of existing spells that you find in the back of the player's handbook. Now you gain 2 Eldritch invocations of your choice at level 2 when you become a Warlock of level 2. And from then on, you will progress as you go up in levels. You will gain a different invocation depending on, well, a different number of invocations depending on the level you are at. I believe at level 2 you get 2 invocations. At level 5 you're going to gain access to 3 invocations. At level 7 you get 4, and the progression from there is basically 3, 3, 3. So you'll get a level 9 you get 5. Level 12 you get 6, and so forth, that particular pattern. So the invocations are really important because they are often, if you pick the right ones, they are the ones you can spam. And spamming invocations might sound horrible and terrible, but it's actually pretty important if you're going to be successful as a Warlock, because you have so few spells and so few spell slots, and you often have to rest quite a lot to be successful. So the key to invocations is selecting the right ones. You need to select ones that you can spam, particularly at low level, and also it's more useful to have the ones that you can spam often or are passive. And in other words, they are always active and always working for you in some way for your Warlock. One of the first things you want to try to do though when you get access to invocations is increase the power of your Eldritch Blast. Now you should have taken that as a cantrip when you started out at level 1. It would be silly not to have Eldritch Blast because the Warlock is built around that particular cantrip. Now the cantrip doesn't do an enormous amount of damage. You're only doing a 10-sided dice worth of damage at level 1, and it will increase. You'll get additional dice as you level up. But you can make it more powerful by using invocations. So first of all, the Agonizing Blast. The Agonizing Blast invocation allows you to add your Charisma modifier to the dice roll for your Eldritch Blast. Really helpful, and I suggest that you do it. It's a no-brainer. This is probably one of the first invocations you should be picking up. It's actually part of the pre-made character sheet for the Warlock that you find on the Wizards of the Coast's website. So how does that work? Well, your Charisma modifier should be pretty high. So whatever your Charisma modifier is, in this case, this particular character has I believe it's a Charisma modifier of +3, got a 16 in the ability, and what you're going to do is roll for your attack. Once you've rolled for your attack, you are going to, so we roll our 20-sided dice. Our attack modifier is listed on the actual character sheet right here. It's a +5, so we roll to hit our target, and that might be a bunch of goblins for all we know. Just chuck some goblins out there just so you've got some targets to hit. Alright, so you roll your 20-sided dice, you add your 5, 13 plus 5 is 18, you hit your target, and then you'll do your 10 dice worth of damage for your Eldritch Blast. And the great thing about Eldritch Blast is it's force damage. So most creatures don't have immunities or resistance to force damage, therefore you're probably going to do a lot better than somebody who's doing piercing damage or any other sort of damage whatsoever. So you roll your dice, and normally you would only get 4 damage. I rolled a 4, so you get 4 force damage against your target if you're level 2 or level 1. But with this Agonizing Blast, you now gain access to, guess what, that +3 from your Charisma modifier. So instead of a 4, it's now 7. That's almost doubled it. So the benefits of having Agonizing Blast at a low level is enormous. So try to remember to grab that particular invocation first. The next one can be really helpful, particularly if you are playing an adventure which is in a wilderness. Not so useful if you're in a dungeon where it's very confined and restrictive and you can't see a long distance. But Eldritch Spear allows your Eldritch Blast to have a range of 300 feet rather than that tiny 120 feet. Now you're not going to have the same benefits as a longbow, but you still increased your range significantly, and you will actually be able to hit targets that some spellcasters can't hit simply because their spells only go a maximum of, say, 120 or 150 feet, and they can't dish out anything else with a longer range than that. That's why that particular ability is really good. You don't necessarily have to just throw all your invocations at 2nd level into beefing up your Eldritch Blast, but certainly you should be thinking about how I can use those, because they're always going to be there. They're always working for you. Repelling Blast. Now, Repelling Blast affects your Eldritch Blast again, and what that's going to do is it's going to push a target 10 feet away from you in a straight line. It can be very, very useful, provided you place it in the right location. It's a bit circumstantial. I still think it's beneficial, but it's personal choice. I think the most important one, definitely at some point you need to pick up that Agonizing Blast and the Eldritch Spear. Now, invocations that you can spam without having to rest are super useful, provided there aren't any prerequisites to that particular invocation. So the types of invocations I'm talking about are ones where when you use them, they don't burn up a spell slot, and there's no use or requirement to use any kind of componentry. In other words, the invocation actually has built into it the use of that particular invocation, no spell slot getting burnt up, and you don't use any materials. So the invocations that I would suggest picking up that you can spam, really helpful to you, are things like Eldritch Sight. This allows you to cast Detect Magic multiple times, and you're not using up a spell slot. Something like Fiendish Vigor. Fiendish Vigor allows you to, basically, you're like casting False Life, and you can do it repeatedly. Now that sounds like, well, you know, what's the purpose in doing that? You can only cast it on yourself. I can't cast it on somebody else, but there's huge benefits to false life. It will certainly make it possible for your character to survive a lot longer. Another really useful one that you can spam, and that is Mask of Many Faces, which allows you to essentially cast Disguise Self. Now, this is what you do. This is what you do well. You can cast the Disguise Self at will. In other words, as many times as you like, and it doesn't expend a spell slot. Your character, your Warlock, is about deception and trickery. So utilizing something like that particular spell can be really helpful for getting through a situation without having to blast down the door or take hits, essentially. Next one I would say that can be very helpful is Beast Speak. Now this essentially allows you to cast the spell Speak with Animals, doesn't use a slot, doesn't use up any materials, another really helpful invocation. The last one I want to talk about is Misty Visions. Misty Visions allows you to cast Silent Image. Now that doesn't sound like a big deal, but just remember how powerful Minor Illusion can be. Suddenly you have a silent image. You can create an image. This is certainly a much more powerful spell than Minor Illusion, so therefore there are some benefits, and you can capitalize on using your deception and your charisma to manipulate the situation. Lastly, I want to talk about passive abilities that are really good to have, and the first one I want to talk about is Beguiling Influence. If you haven't already got proficiency in deception, this is going to give you proficiency in deception and persuasion skills. So it's cashing in on your charisma, your high charisma. It's going to make it a lot easier to use that, and it's always there, it's always working. Another really good invocation. The next one I would say almost a no-brainer for picking up, simply because if you're playing Dungeons and Dragons, you're going to be in places that are really dark. So Devil's Sight. So you can see normally in darkness, both magical and non-magical. That's a big deal. It's not just normal. Now, tieflings can see in the dark anyway, but you've just extended their range. Now you can see through magical darkness, which is a big deal, but it's 120 feet. That's like twice the distance. I know it sounds like, well, do I really need the extra distance? Will it make any difference? I've seen more than a few players playing in my games where something like Devil's Sight has made all the difference in a situation where they've dealt with drow. So if you're playing an adventure where there are drow and you're in the Underdark, the chances are you're going to wind up with darkness being cast. And so this is a really useful invocation to have. The next one, the last one I want to mention, and it's actually part of the character sheet. They've actually included it, this pre-made character sheet, and that's Eyes of the Runekeeper. Eyes of the Runekeeper doesn't sound like a big deal, but you can read all writing. So all written languages, you can read them. You may not be able to speak them, but you can read them. So you may not be able to understand what somebody's saying, but you can read them. Really useful, and it's a passive ability. It's one of those things that's always working for you. After that, we start getting into spells that, should I say, invocations. Invocations that have a prerequisite or are not quite as useful as some of the other ones that are available to you. So, Armor of Shadows. This essentially allows you to cast Mage Armor on yourself at will without expending a spell slot or any kind of material components. It's actually a problematic invocation because Mage Armor is really important for a Warlock, but you're not going to need to cast it more than once in any given day. So the chances are that being able to cast it at will isn't hugely helpful because it actually states you can only cast it on yourself. Normally you can cast Mage Armor on other characters or NPCs or other player characters, but you can't with Armor of Shadows. So this is actually one of those invocations I wouldn't necessarily recommend. I think you're probably better off to burn your slot on using Mage Armor, or find a way of increasing your armor class a different way by either using armor or shields or something like that. Even if you're wearing light armor and wearing a shield, you're probably going to have a better time than using up an entire invocation, which you really, it's going to last 8 hours. Why would you need to do that? A centered step. So this is required. You have to be level 9 to be able to do this, and you can cast Levitate on yourself. It's a great spell because it doesn't expend a spell slot. It doesn't require any material components as an invocation. So that's a super helpful invocation, but you do have to get to 9th level to access it, which is one of the pains. Bewitching Whispers, you can gain that at 7th level, and that allows you to cast Compulsion once using a Warlock slot, and you can't do so again until you finish a long rest. It's one of those invocations I really don't see why you would even bother with unless you're trying to expand the number of spells that you can cast because you have such a limited range of known spells that you can actually use at any given time. So it's not one of the ones that I would necessarily suggest picking up because it's not super helpful as far as I'm concerned. The other ones that are related to picking up a pact, so whether it's the Pact of the Tomb, the Pact of the Chain, I'm not actually going to go into them. I feel like a lot of those are very situational. They're usually things you can only pick up at quite high level, and you also have to select the right pact for it to be useful to you. At Dreadful Word, you can pick that up at 7th level, and that allows you to cast Confusion once using one of your spell slots. Another problem where you have to complete a long rest before you gain access. All it's trying to do is give you more spells within your known spell list. Truthfully, I don't think it's a terribly useful invocation for a Warlock. The next one I would want to point out is, where is it? There it is, Life Drinker. So it's a prerequisite is level 12. You need to have Pact of the Blade, and when you hit a creature with your Pact Blade or weapon, the creature takes extra necrotic damage equal to your Charisma modifier, and the minimum it can be is a 1, your Charisma modifier, although your modifier should be at least a 3 or more. It's actually a pretty good feature. It's only adding maybe anywhere from 3 to 5 onto your damage, and you'll be 12th level. So you need to think very carefully about whether it's important for you to do that. But if you're using your Pact Blades and weapons a lot, then certainly it would make sense to start powering that up as much as you can. Master of Myriad Forms. The prerequisite is being level 15, and chances are you'll never get to level 15, but we'll talk briefly about it. It allows you to cast Alter Self at will without expending a spell slot. Quite a useful spell, but can the same thing be done with Disguise Self? I think you might find that it's one of those spells which you want to pull out the Disguise Self and plop in the Alter Self, because it's certainly a much more powerful spell than Disguise Self. Alter Self, you're literally transforming yourself in some way, and it doesn't expend a spell slot. So if you've got the ability to actually change your form, change how you appear using Mask of Many Faces, swap it out and pick up this one, this Master of Myriad Forms, so you can get the Alter Self invocation. You can cast it at will. Minions of Chaos, available at level 9, and you can cast Conjure Elemental once using your Warlock spell slot. Yet again, one of those things where I feel like it's just trying to build out your Warlock spells known list. Not super helpful. Mire the Mind. So this is available at level 5, and you can cast Slow once using a Warlock slot again. Yet again, not a spell that I would be terribly useful, find terribly useful. And as an invocation, all it's doing is building out your known spells. I don't think it's a terribly useful invocation for you though. One with Shadows, available at level 5. When you are in an area of dim light or darkness, you can use your action to become invisible until you move or take an action or a reaction. Now it's available at level 5, essentially provided you got dim light or darkness, you've just become invisible. Now in darkness, they're probably not going to be able to see you anyway, so you would get advantage on your attacks when you make your attack, on the first attack anyway. In dim light, that could be quite useful. If you can find a location that has dim light, you're now able to become invisible, and then you can get that advantage. So you're rolling 2 dice, and that Eldritch Blast that comes out of the dim light is going to probably hit, and good chance if you get better chances of rolling a 20 on your dice if you're rolling with advantage. So actually not a bad invocation. It's pretty good. Otherworldly Leap. So this is available at level 9, and you can jump. You can cast Jump on yourself at will without expending a spell slot or material components. Not super useful. It's a bit situational. I wouldn't recommend picking it up unless you find yourself having to do a lot of jumping, and maybe your Dungeon Master has turned Dungeons and Dragons into a video game like Super Mario Brothers or something like that. Sculptor of Flesh, available at level 7. You can cast Polymorph once using a Warlock spell slot, and you can't use it until you finish a long rest. It's expanding your spells known, essentially. The spells that you know that you can cast. That's all it's really doing. Polymorph is a very powerful spell, so super helpful to have, but it's a trade-off between, do I want my invocations to just expand the number of spells I have, or do I want it to actually do something else? Sign of Ill Omen. You can cast Bestow Curse once using your Warlock's spell slot. Again, just expanding your spells known. Thief of 5 Fates allows you to cast Bane. Same sort of thing as I said before. All it's doing is you've got to use a spell slot, and you've got to have a long rest before you can gain it back. Visions of the Distant Realms. You can cast Arcane Eye at will without expending a spell slot. But the requirement is you have to be level 15. For a level 15 character, do I need to start worrying about using Arcane Eye? The chances are, at this point, I'm using a familiar. I've got a familiar who's probably an imp, who can transform into magical spiders and is invisible, or some other creature and can't be spotted and can climb on ceilings or walls. So I wouldn't say that Visions of Distant Realms is super helpful to you. I wouldn't pick that up if I were you. Whispers of the Grave, you can pick that up at level 9. You can cast Speak with Dead at will without expending a spell slot. It's another very situational invocation. Unless you are wanting to, you find yourself in a party where they tend to knock everybody down and they kill everybody, and you want to be able to speak with them after because you didn't get a chance to in the middle of combat. So it can be useful, but still very situational. And the last one here that I want to talk about is Witch Sight, which is available at level 15, and you can see the true form of any shape changer or creature concealed by an illusion or transmutation magic while the creature is within 30 feet of you or within line of sight. The line of sight's good. 30 feet's a bit too close. It'll be a bit too late if you find out what they are and you're 30 feet away. Line of sight's better. This is one of those things that's yet again very situational, and you have to make the decision, do I want it or do I want to just leave it? So that is the gist of this particular session. I will go back to the chart just so that you can see that there is, as I said, an increase in how many invocations you get as you level up, and that can be super helpful to you, but you do have to wait anywhere from 3 levels to 2 levels before you get an additional addition to your invocations. Now if you don't like an invocation, you can replace it. You can take them out and put in a new one. That's certainly possible. It's highlighted the details around that. Just a short sentence basically, and you can find that on page 110 of the Player's Handbook. Okay, so I'm going to open it up for questions. But if you found this video helpful or informative, please share and like the video. If you're not already subscribed and you like this sort of content and you like it being live, then by all means click the subscribe button if you're not subscribed. Hit the bell button if you want the occasional notification, and I'll give you the occasional notification. YouTube does that all for you, basically. It just sends it through. You shouldn't necessarily get a notification every time there's a video produced, but it's occasional. If you have any questions about the Warlock and their invocations, I'm going to answer those near the end of this live stream when I sign out, or should I say when I do my final sign off. But if you're not part of the live stream, put a question or a comment. If I've left anything out that needed to be said about the basics of using invocations, put it in the comment. If you have questions, I'll answer those questions in the comment section if you're not part of the live stream, so that I can help you out as best I can. This is a good time to start sticking questions into the chat box if you have questions to ask. If you want to support my channel, watching more videos is great because I get a little bit of added revenue from AdSense or YouTube. I don't do Patreon. If you want to really support me, down in the description there's usually an affiliate link, and if clicking that on and buying stuff online, I get a small commission and you pay exactly the same price. It can be really good for me, and you don't have to wind up dishing out any extra money. And that is pretty much wrapping it up. We're going to sign out now, and I'm going to say, till next time, keep rolling those 20s. Okay, I'm still here. I'm not going to be going away. I will answer questions. I would like to try to keep the questions to the Warlock and invocations, but if people want to ask questions that are related to other things to deal with the Warlock and I feel I can answer those questions, then I will do my best to answer them right now. If you have questions unrelated to the Warlock, I will hang around for, I would say, about 10 minutes at the max. So if you have questions about just playing the game, or being a player of Dungeons and Dragons, or being a dungeon master, maybe you've got a dungeon master and you've had a player who's playing a Warlock and you're having a few issues, or you're just finding that it's a bit hard to sort of get to grips with the fact that they are constantly asking for a short rest so they can get their spell slots back. I'm quite happy to answer those questions if you want me to. I'm just going to take a glass of water and a drink. All right. So yes, I am open for questions. If people aren't don't have too many questions, we'll cut it short. For those of you who are wondering, will I be talking about the Hexblade? The Hexblade is probably not something I'll talk about for quite some time. The only reason being is that there aren't that many people who have the material. It's available, it's out there, you can get access to it, but most people when they're starting out are going to tend to have something like the Player's Handbook. And therefore I am trying to really focus on getting through the material in the Player's Handbook rather than covering something like the Hexblade. I am aware that the Hexblade, out of all of the different types of Warlock that you can have, is probably one of the more powerful Warlocks available. I haven't seen it played at my table. I don't think I've seen it played at my table ever. That's probably just because it's new content and I sort of stopped dungeon mastering over the Christmas break. But yeah, certainly I know that it is quite a powerful build. It certainly was in previous versions of the game. So when we were playing Dungeons and Dragons 4E, the Hexblade was a very popular class or subclass to have. For those of you who are unaware, I have been in the process of building a Facebook group. It's still in the process of being constructed, and what I'm also doing is I'm building a Twitch TV channel for HowtoDandD. Right now it's actually called Frederick Wheeler 129. That is all lowercase with no spaces, and I'm going to be trying to stream on that particular Twitch TV channel this coming Friday, New Zealand Standard Time, at 7:30 p.m. and we'll play through to about 11. I see I have a question there. I'll get to that in a second, Jacob. So if you're wanting to watch live stream me dungeon mastering, or at least hearing me dungeon master, because my players don't really want the camera pointed at them, and we'll be just using a cell phone. It'll be on a mobile device, so the quality may not be super great, unfortunately, but that's just sort of what I have available for this particular purpose. The other thing is, if this is successful, then the Twitch TV channel, if that works, it'll get called HowtoDandD once I'm able to. I need a certain time frame to pass before I can do that if it's successful. So by all means, go and check out and see if you can find the Twitch TV channel Frederick Wheeler. That's FrederickWheeler 129. There's no spaces, and we will be playing Storm King's Thunder on Friday from 7:30 p.m. to 11 p.m. New Zealand Standard Time. Okay. All right, and if the Twitch TV thing doesn't work out, then we're going to go to Facebook, and I'm going to live stream it on Facebook Live. But we'll see. We'll see if the Twitch TV thing works first. All right, Jacob, you've got a question here, I think. Would you ever run a Warlock as a villain in an encounter? Or do evil wizards present more of a challenge? Well, no, I think a Warlock actually is actually a really good villain to run in any kind of encounter. You don't want everything to be exactly the same. The thing to remember is with a Warlock is they have somebody who's backing them. Their patron is not the sort of patron that a cleric has. You know, they may worship or beholden to a deity, but their deity doesn't usually show up to talk to them. They have to be quite a high level for that to be possible. But a Warlock's patron is a lot further down the list. They are godlike, and they can imbue power to some other being or creature, but they are definitely capable of showing up. So there's no reason why you couldn't have a Warlock and their patron together, and that's a very scary encounter. So yeah, don't think that would be a pushover. Warlocks aren't a pushover, they have big backings. And also, you know, throwing in a few minions to sort of hold them back so the Warlock can do its stuff. Hopefully that answered your question. I certainly hope it did. I'm just going to grab another glass of water. See, there's a little bit of buffering going on there. I don't know why that's going on, but apparently it's still holding together, which is the main thing. For those of you who were wondering why I didn't talk about some of the other invocations that are available, such as Book of the Ancient Secrets or Chains of Carceria, the reason I'm not talking about those is they're really, I feel like they're much more advanced. It's much more advanced in the way that they work, and therefore they're not really basics. You know, if I was doing something that's more about pulling apart the Warlock's invocations, I would be calling Warlock Advanced number 3, or Warlock Invocations Advanced, something like that, because you're actually dealing with some pretty complicated stuff here. It's quite involved, and yeah, you really also too you have to build your Warlock right for them to work. Alright, I think we are pretty much up. Everybody seems to have asked their questions. I don't see anything else coming through. This is probably a good point to say see you later, and let you guys go get some sleep or go back to work or whatever it is that you're currently doing. Maybe you woke up for this. I doubt it. Please don't. You can watch the replay. These streams are going to be put up. They take about half an hour to an hour for YouTube to process, and they will go back up, so you can watch them at a later date, particularly if you missed the first part or you weren't present for the live stream. You can watch them at a later date. It's not necessarily to worry about hanging around and you know, praying that it's sort of I'm going to catch it during the live stream. They will be replayed. Okay, I am going to head off, and I'll say goodbye to you guys, and yep, May all your dice roll 20s.